Good morning, everybody. I've got a bit of an echo. Is that me?
Morning.
It's off now. It's off now. Right, good morning, everybody. I'd like to welcome everybody this morning. Our first meeting in 2025. This multi-location hybrid meeting of the Governance and Audit Committee, which is open to the press and public on request. This meeting will not be broadcast live. However, a recording will be made available as soon as possible after the meeting has concluded. We welcome the use of Welsh language at meetings, and I have had no request for people to speak Welsh today, so this meeting will be conducted in English only. Please can members attending via Microsoft Teams refrain from using the chat function and instead use the raise hand icon to indicate when you want to speak. May I remind members that as per statutory guidance made under Section 4 of the Local Government Wales Measure 2011 and our formally adopted hybrid meeting policy, any member attending a meeting remotely must be able to be seen and heard by the members and officers who are attending the meeting, as well as by members of the public viewing the meeting. So can I ask that you all please use your cameras for the duration of this meeting. Please remember to keep your microphone muted when you're not talking. Moving on to agenda item 1, welcome and apologies. Jay, do we have any apologies, please?
Thanks, Chair. We've had apologies from Councillor Glynn this morning.
Thank you. Agenda item 2, declarations of interest. Jade, can you please ask the members in alphabetical order to state whether they have any interest to declare?
Of course. So starting with Councillor Ashley, please.
I need this confirmed by Derfa, May. Number one, I know is that I'm in receipt of a pension by the authority. Number 2, I haven't declared anywhere else, but Section 7, Capital and Treasury Management, 25-26. I was in receipt of a DFG from last year. I'm not sure if that's relevant or not. Could you advise me accordingly, Derek, please?
Thank you, Councillor Ashley. I don't think, unless there's specific reference there, and you actually asked a question about disabled facilities grants, my advice is I don't think there's a need for you to declare.
Thank you there. I don't need to declare that.
Thanks, Councillor Ashley. Moving on to Councillor Jones, please.
Thank you. My partner's in receipt of a Torfaen pension, and I'm a paying-in member of the Councillors' Pension Scheme. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Kelleher, please.
Yes, thank you. I'm in receipt of a small pension from Torfaen.
Thank you. And yourself, Chair?
Thank you. My husband's in receipt of a pension from Greater Gwent pension.
Thank you. Mr. Rees, please.
Pawb, blwyddyn newydd dda. I have a very small Torfaen Council pension from a number of years ago. Thanks.
Thank you. And Councillor Williams, please.
Yes, myself and wife in receipt of pension and contributors to pension.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Moving on to agenda item 3, the minutes of the Governance and Audit Committee meeting from the 3rd of October last year. There were several members not able to attend this meeting, so I'm hoping everybody's had a chance to read the minutes, and if you might have any questions or queries, please could you raise them now? I see no raised hands. I take it that nobody needs to query them. If not, I'll take them as agreed. Moving on to agenda item 4, the minutes of the Special Governance and Audit Committee from the 7th of November last year. Members, please can you state whether you have anything to raise in relation to the minutes? If not, I'll take them as agreed. I see no raised hands. I'll take them as agreed. Agenda item 5 is the action sheet. There is only one action on this sheet. A note in its contents. It's something that's ongoing with regard to pricing and making the reports that we receive easier to read. This was in place from March last year. Tom, did you want to say something?
Yeah, it was a point that Councillor Williams raised with me when we had a large number of reports came in at the same time. I still haven't picked up the conversation with Councillor Williams, but as I'm sat next to him, I think I will at the end of the meeting. But it did relate to a situation where we had a huge number of reports in at the same time. So we don't often get that situation. So I'll speak to Councillor Williams and see what he had in mind. But it may be difficult to change, given it's just one of those freak instances where there was a lot of reports at the same time. But
Yeah, I agree with that. I'm looking at it. It's the sort of thing that's going to be ongoing, really, isn't it? There's never going to be a tick-off date when you say this is going to be completed. So I'm wondering whether we need to keep this as an action point or just be... Councillor Williams?
I think Tom's explained very clearly. I think it's one of those things that probably is addressed when needed. But I would suggest, since it goes back so far, that we don't keep it as an action, personally.
Anybody second that? Right, I think that's agreed then. We'll remove this as an action point and we'll just be aware of the reports as they're coming through. Is that okay with everybody? Thank you. Moving on to agenda item 6, update on external regulatory reports. Tom Roberts, Business Democratic and Sport Manager, please can you present your report?
thank you, Chair, and good morning, members. So this is your usual report setting out details of new external audit work received by the Council. As the committee is aware, Torfaen Council has a protocol for dealing with new external audit reports, which has been agreed by this committee. In brief, that requires all new reports to be received by the Governance and Audit Committee, referred to the relevant scrutiny committee, or maintained under the oversight of this committee and added to the Council's single Governance and Improvement Action Plan. This is monitored by this committee every 6 months. The report isn't to undertake a scrutiny of the recommendations, rather it is to assure itself that the recommendations being received are being properly considered and actioned. That said, if there are any questions about the specifics of each report, I will either try and answer or get you the information you need outside of this meeting. As you can see, there are 3 new reports received by the Council since the last update in October 2024. 1 local report, an Audit Wales study on counter-fraud arrangements, and 2 national reports, a joint review conducted by CIW Estyn and the Health Inspector at Wales on how healthcare, education and children's services are supporting the mental health needs of children and young people in Wales, and a national report from Audit Wales on the financial sustainability of local government. So as far as the individual reports are concerned, counter-fraud arrangements, overall Audit Wales concluded the Council's focus on strong governance and controls provides a sound foundation for preventing and detecting fraud, and there was scope to strengthen some aspects of the arrangements. There were 3 recommendations made. The first recommendation was around promoting our zero-tolerance approach to fraud to staff and members to improve understanding of their responsibilities. The second recommendation was around extending our record of fraud losses and recoveries to cover the whole authority. And the third recommendation was around ensuring the Governance and Audit Committee receives sufficient information to discharge its duties and assess the effectiveness of counter-fraud arrangements. The Council's organisational response form is included in Appendix 2, setting out how we intend to respond to these recommendations. Our response to these recommendations will be continued to be monitored by the Governance and Audit Committee. The second report, Children's Services Supporting Mental Health. This national thematic joint review concluded that while some progress has been made, the findings reveal that many children and young people across Wales are still struggling to access the help they need when they need it. Positives are picked up in the report, however, further action is required to ensure that every child and young person in Wales gets the right support at the right time. The report has illustrated the need for organisations to work better together, particularly in addressing the ongoing challenges with accessing specialist mental health support across Wales. Many of the big-ticket, most significant recommendations are focused on Welsh Government addressing the need to improve funding and access to services, but there's a raft of recommendations for the local authorities and health boards to mitigate, focused on stronger partnership working, communication between services and the coordination of care. There are 12 of these recommendations for health boards and local government, as well as a further recommendation for education and schools to undertake a self-evaluation exercise against the identified strengths and areas for development. The Council is part of a regional response to these recommendations, which is ongoing. I will ensure this is disseminated around the committee in due course. Our response to these recommendations will be monitored by the Council's Education and Children's and Families Overview and Scrutiny Committees. Finally, the National Financial Sustainability Report. This is Audit Wales' national report following the local financial sustainability report received by all councils across Wales in the autumn. Largely, the report is included for completeness. There's no new recommendations, and members will recall receiving our local report at your meeting in October. There were also no new recommendations contained within the local report. I've included the key findings in the reports, but I won't go into them now. Finally, I'd like to remind members that officers with responsibility for addressing recommendations receive reports and are required to ensure the Council responds appropriately. These reports have already been received and discussed by the Council's leadership team. The process will continue to be monitored through reports received by this committee and the Council's scrutiny committees. Thank you, Chair. I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you very much. Are there any questions with regard to these reports, please? Mr. Keller, your hands raised.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. And thank you, Tom. I just wanted to seek some clarification on the children's services and mental health recommendations, particularly the recommendation 10, which I think tries to focus that sort of multi-partnership approach to providing support in with children and possibly their parents, I guess, with additional language needs other than English and Welsh. I was just wondering, when the response is considered, do we also include BSL or sign along as a sort of multi-sensory language requirement when we respond or monitor those recommendations?
Yeah, I'm going to have to get you that information outside of the committee, Mr. Kelleher. Obviously, I'm not part of the group that's producing the response, but I will get you that information and let you know what they say.
Thank you very much. From just making sure that we're as inclusive as possible when we respond and monitor. Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Ashley, your hand is raised.
Yes, it is. I was going to ask about the healthcare and education children's services. What scrutiny or scrutineers committees are actually responsible for this? Because there's a considerable amount of work involved in this, by the look of it. And you did mention that. Also, Tom, I'd like to thank you for a clear report. And also, I'm quite impressed by the format that we're getting it now. It's working incredibly well on my tablet, which has in the past not been the case.
Thanks, Councillor Ashley. As far as the scrutiny committees, as it says in the report, the recommendations and the findings, they straddle two of our scrutiny committees, the Education Committee and predominantly the Children and Families Committee. It may be that they meet together as they did yesterday in order to review the progress against the recommendations.
So this would make the subject of several meetings, by the look of it.
I wouldn't dream of telling the chairs of those committees how they should be responding to the recommendation. That wasn't my observation. That there's an awful lot of work in it. There are a lot of recommendations. I agree. Yep.
Thank you, Tom.
Thank you both. Mr. Rees, your hand is raised.
Chair, thank you, Tom, for the report. I just wanted to touch upon the what the audit Audit Wales has said about our counter fraud strategy arrangements, and the 3 recommendations that are there. The council has responded, I believe, quite comprehensively to outline how we are going to deal with all of that, and it highlights how we, as well as other parts of the council, will monitor things as we move forward. I just wondered, I'm not sure whether, Tom, you would know the answer to this, or whether our colleague from Audit Wales would be able to pitch in as to when you might be returning to this subject, so that we'd know that you know, what we are responding to those recommendations you know, is actually working. Thanks.
I can answer that one. In terms of updating the anti-fraud strategy, I've already got a draft following the production of the report. I was waiting for the report to be finalised, which it now has. So I've got a draft of that. That will go through leadership team and the officer, who can then come to audit committee for approval. As for the other 2 recommendations, the one is about a sort of template of an ongoing cumulative value of frauds identified, and they are quite low in the authority at the moment. The ones we've captured relate mainly to housing benefit, but I'll expand that and probably bring it at least once a year to audit committee as part of my annual report. And the third one relates around fraud risk assessments and the NFI material. The draft audit plan for next year will be coming to the March audit committee, and that fraud risk assessment will be included as part of the pack for that. And NFI is an item further on the agenda, but I'll be increasing the sort of reporting we do of NFI to audit committee members in due course. So hopefully we'll be able to address those within a timely manner in the next sort of 6 to 9 months.
Okay, thank you for that.
Just to highlight regarding, you know, the overall process, this committee will receive updates every 6 months as well, to make sure that they're comfortable with the progress that's been made.
Okay, thank you. That's reassuring. Councillor Williams, you had a question.
Well, thank you, Chair. No, I just think, as has been helpfully pointed out, it's recommendation 3 under the account of fraud audit. It's of most pertaining to this committee, and I think we've asked some of the questions about some of the detail around fraud previously. So I'm fairly comfortable that we've got a good monitor for this and that it will be reported. So thank you, Peter, for the update in terms of it coming back. The last point was obviously, to some extent, the bit about financial sustainability has been a little bit overtaken through the fact of a now known settlement and budget planning. And obviously we've taken forward a budget. So I think that it's something merely to note, but it's slightly been overtaken by events.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone. Jane, would you like to make a comment?
Thanks, Chair. I just noticed that Councillor Davis has joined. Could I just confirm whether you have any declarations of interest to make, please?
No, thanks. Apologies for being late, but the previous meeting overrun by a couple of minutes.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you and welcome. Right, are there any other queries or questions with regards to these reports? Okay. So taking that then, members, the recommendations are on page 28 of the agenda. Please can you state if you're against the recommendations or wish to abstain? Otherwise I'll take them as agreed. Okay, we'll take them as agreed. Thank you very much. Moving on now to agenda item 7, Capital and Treasury Management Strategy for 2025-26 to 2029-30. Mr. Robert Green, please can you present your report?
Thank you, Chair. Morning, everyone. Yeah, so I'm just going to do a quick run through of the report. I appreciate it's quite a lengthy report and it's quite sort of detailed and technical in its nature. So I'll do an overview, but clearly if there's anything you want me to comment on in more detail, I'm happy to come back to that. So in terms of the report in front of you today, so it's the Capital and Treasury Management Strategy, which covers the next 5-year period. As a reminder, the committee are required to scrutinise and consider the contents and obviously make any comments as required, ultimately prior to Council approving this strategy in March alongside the budget for the forthcoming year. So there's two main documents, the capital strategy, which outlines the capital expenditure plans, how those plans will be financed over the medium term, and also gives an outlook in terms of the long-term position regarding capital expenditure. The second detailed document, which is included as Appendix A, but almost sits as a standalone strategy in itself, is the Treasury Management Strategy, which outlines our approach to managing our cash flow requirements and particularly our borrowing and investment strategies. And then a key area that underpins both strategies are the prudential indicators for the forthcoming year, which the Council will ultimately approve, and then we will adhere to throughout the year, and those ensure that there's sufficient control around capital and treasury management activities throughout the year. In terms of the capital strategy, the key aims, it's all about the long-term context in which capital decisions are made, ensuring alignment with the Council's overall aims and objectives and how they are prioritised in a capital sense within the current financial context, ensuring that capital resources are appropriately used, particularly at a time when resources, albeit there is a slightly more positive outlook, capital resources are still incredibly scarce, and our ability to create our own capital resources is quite restricted. So we have to ensure that those resources are used appropriately. We have to ensure that there's alignment between the capital and treasury management strategies as well, and we also include a section which outlines the overall governance arrangements that we have in place in terms of managing the capital programme in particular. So in terms of the key highlights within the report, so it outlines the proposed capital programme for both the year coming and the years that follow that, so the 5-year period. So £59 million programme in total, 29 currently in the first year, the 25-26 year. That figure is likely to increase for two reasons. One, there will probably be more slippage from 24-25 into 25-26. We'll only know that when we get to the end of the year. But also grants are likely to be awarded to the Council throughout the year, and they will be added to the programme as and when confirmed. Table 1 in the report provides that overview of the programme, the proposed programme, and paragraph 4.1.4 gives some more detail around the main projects within that programme. If you want to see the full programme, that's included at Appendix B. Just draw your attention to the resources to be allocated line within that table, so that, as implied, represents our available uncommitted resources. So there's a total of 7.6 million there across the 5 years. That might sound, a reasonable amount, but actually, in the grand scheme of things, and considering that's a 5-year figure, that's a relatively low amount, and that just reinforces the point made earlier about prioritisation of those resources being key. In terms of how we fund the programme, so section 4.2 provides the overview of the different funding sources and reaffirms what we already know. The majority of our capital funding comes from external sources, mainly grants from Welsh Government, and more recently we've had more grants from UK Government, particularly with the Shared Prosperity Fund being in place. Actually, the Council's own resources represent a very small proportion. We talk about borrowing in the report, so the level of proposed new borrowing, i.e. capital expenditure that is initially unfunded and then funded over a longer period of time, that's low, and that's consistent with where we've been for a number of years. Table 3 demonstrates the cumulative historic effect of previous borrowing and the fact that the capital finance requirement, which is that total aggregate unfunded capex, that's only set to reduce marginally over the medium term. So the point of highlighting that is that although we're not committing to much in the way of new borrowing, we still have that historic obligation to meet, that historic liability. So actually there is an ongoing impact upon the revenue budget. Basically, we make payments known as MRP, and they reduce that historic liability over the long term. So it's critical that we have sufficient revenue budget provision to meet those payments. It's effectively like making a mortgage repayment. And they are long term, so obviously that budget needs to be secure for the foreseeable future. So we have some commentary in the report around that and the fact that that's in place. There's then a section around the long-term outlook for capital. We're anticipating high demand for capital resources. That's driven by both the condition of our estate, both building estate and highways estate, but also the growing demand for certain services and the physical infrastructure requirements that come off the back of that. But as I said, availability of resources is constrained, so there's a balance to be addressed there. And as a result, we'll need to maximise the level of external funding that we can generate. As I've already said a couple of times, we'll need to prioritise schemes very carefully and ensure that only the highest priorities are committed to. Our ability to create new borrowing headroom will be difficult. That ultimately creates pressure upon the revenue budget and requires difficult decisions to potentially have to be made, unless, for example, interest rates were to dramatically drop from the level that they are now. We're not anticipating that will happen, but if that was to happen, that would create some headroom potentially, albeit a lot of our borrowing is already fixed and locked in, so it wouldn't make as big a difference as you might anticipate. And because of that, it means that asset management and optimisation of the estate will continue to be critical. The smaller our asset base, clearly the less maintenance, the less large-scale repairs that will be needed, and actually we can generate capital receipts from any assets we can dispose. So that strategy is a key strategy that links with this one. So that's capital. I'll just quickly run through the Treasury management bit in particular. So Section 5 gives an overview of the strategy. On Treasury management, Appendix A provides much more detail. Ultimately, this is focused on ensuring we have enough cash available to meet our spending requirements and that our approach to risk is appropriate and proportionate. Within the Treasury strategy, Treasury management strategy, there are two key aspects, the borrowing strategy and the investment strategy. So in terms of borrowing, we have an internal borrowing strategy, which basically means that even if the theory tells us that we have a borrowing need because we're committing to unfunded capital expenditure, if we have adequate cash balances available because we've got reserves and whatever, we would use those cash balances first rather than access an external borrowing, simply because the investment income we'd lose on those cash balances is likely to be have less of an impact than the interest we pay on that external borrowing. So we prioritise internal borrowing. When we do have a need to long-term borrow, we always try and ensure the best rates are achieved. And if rates are high as they are at the moment, and there's anticipation they'll reduce, we'd look at temporary borrowing as an interim measure, so that we don't commit unnecessarily to higher rates than we need to. Our borrowing activity is controlled by two limits. The authorised limit, which is the ultimate maximum borrowing we can have at any single point, and then the operational boundary. The operational boundary is what we really work to. We can temporarily breach it if we have a short-term cash flow need, but generally we would try and work within that as well. And then just moving on to the investment strategy, and then I'll conclude. So in terms of investment, so if we have any excess cash, we'll always ensure that security of investment is the highest priority before liquidity and then yield, in that order. We generally have a low-risk appetite, and we select low-risk counterparties when we are investing surplus cash. And we generally keep our investments to a term of less than 12 months, unless there's a clear need or benefit in going for a longer period than that. And just a reminder, finally, that we have a requirement to always have a minimum 10 million investment balance. That's under something called the MiFID II directive. Basically ensures we retain professional client status, and we can access better rates through things like bodies like the PWLB. So we'll always have 10 million. So that's where we may consider to do a longer term investment, because we know we're always going to need that minimum balance. So that's me done. As a reminder, committee are to consider and make any comments as required.
Thank you very much. Are there any questions, queries with regards to these reports, please? You must have done a good job. Oh, hang on. Councillor Ashley, your hand is raised.
Yeah, thank you. It's a really interesting report. I found it fascinating because we just done our assets management programme at scrutiny. So a few questions were raised there. Obviously, you talk about assets. The questions obviously raised there about maintenance of assets, and you also talk about where we can dispose of assets and instead of borrowing. I'm fascinated by this as a subject, to be quite honest. There's a few questions I had there. I go back to the ones that are not about that, but I read in the report that you've got below 10 10 grand you can borrow. What's the limit on that for the council if people are allowing 10 grands? Is there any sort of record of how much that is actually borrowed on that principle? That was one question. The other was about grants. I'm trying to read my notes, by the way. Sorry about this. The grants programme. You put a lot of this in place. I'll forget that bit. It was also the maintenance of assets and whether we were developing them and what we were going to liquefy, because that did get raised last week, and I'm absolutely fascinated by this subject, to be honest. But in terms of our assets, we got, I believe it was about 800, and we went through that with Tim, but it's obviously pertinent to what we're talking about today. I'm trying to keep off what we did then, but could you comment on some of this, please, if you would?
Yeah, okay. So in terms of assets, just touching on that. So within the capital programme, we have an allocation for asset maintenance. So that's asset maintenance of a capital nature. And this might be where the first question was coming from. We have a £10,000 sort of de minimis level for capital expenditure. So anything of a maintenance nature that exceeds £10,000, we would class as capital. So effectively, we would see that as enhancing the value of that asset and therefore add it to the overall value of the asset. Anything under 10,000 would be classed as revenue expense because it would be something fairly minor, day-to-day repairs, nothing that's enhancing the condition or the value, just simply keeping that asset in the state that it should be. So that's the sort of, hopefully that's helped to address the 10,000 question. In terms of asset maintenance, we do have a large, as all local authorities do, it's surprising how many assets local authorities own. Generally, there's a lot of maintenance required, and a lot of local authorities have got into a position where there are significant backlogs around maintenance, and that creates pressure upon capital, the demand for capital resources. As I was saying, as talking through the report, one way to help mitigate that pressure and that backlog is actually to dispose of assets that aren't required or aren't being used to their optimum. So, that is part of what perhaps the forthcoming asset management strategy will look to address. And just straying into budget setting territory, there is, as we would have touched on in previous scrutiny committee meetings, an Apollo programme of which one strand is around asset rationalisation. That has a number of benefits. It reduces the day-to-day revenue costs of maintaining and running an asset. It potentially reduces the capital pressure, but it also can generate a capital receipt if we're able to dispose of that asset for some form of consideration. So hopefully that's provided some more information, but we're happy to take any more questions on that topic.
Thank you very much. Chair, can I just briefly come back? Thank you. That's clarified that. That was the bit I was after. And in our capital programme, did we ever look at getting new assets? Or that was a question that was raised at scrutiny. I'm not sure if it went through any questions, but we talk about disposing of assets. There was a thought about that.
I think in terms of acquiring new assets, that is something that, it is an option that is available. I think generally speaking, we would always, look to work with the asset base that we already have. Things can be repurposed for demand that we already have. That's generally, not always, but generally going to be a better value option than acquiring a new asset. And also those, it is difficult sometimes to acquire assets or acquire land that is required to build on an asset. Obviously, we're a relatively small borough, and there isn't a huge amount of land out there to be acquired. But yeah, it is an option. It isn't something that's sort of actively pursued because, as I said, we generally try and prioritise the existing asset base and using that as best as possible before considering acquiring something.
So our asset base is a diminishing return in terms of physical assets.
Sorry, in terms of...
but generally we're diminishing rather than acquiring. We don't...
Yeah, generally speaking, yes, we would be shrinking our asset base, yeah.
Thank you very much for that.
Thanks, Councillor Ashley. Mr. Rees, your hand is raised.
Thank you, Chair, and thanks, Robert, for this this report. I just wanted to touch upon paragraph 4.4.3 at the foot of page 58 of our reports pack. You've got a sentence there that says it's assumed that our net revenue stream increases annually because of improved Welsh Government funding, which, other things being equal, will reduce the overall percentage. If Welsh Government funding didn't improve, or either stayed equal, level, or was reduced, how does that impact into all of the figures that you've put together here? How would that impact on the report that you've put together? Do you understand where I'm coming from?
Yeah, I think so. So this particular paragraph is focused largely on the revenue stream, so our core revenue funding. It rarely reduces. Even during austerity, it was more of a flat lining of revenue funding. We've just had confirmation of our provisional settlement for next year, which is suggesting we'll have a 4.8% increase. So, generally speaking, the revenue stream will tend to increase. But if it didn't, or it flatlined, ultimately, so in terms of that particular measure, that percentage would naturally increase, because if the funding's flatlined but the capital financing costs are increasing, then clearly they're going to become a greater proportion of that funding stream. But in a wider budgetary sense, if funding was constrained or reducing, then ultimately the council has to balance its budget, so it will take in, it will have to consider all options for doing that. And one thing that theoretically could be done is we could reduce the committed or future intended capital spend to be funded through borrowing, which is the main thing that will drive up the capital financing budget. What we can't really do is decommit spend in terms of borrowing repayments or interest that we've already historically committed to. And this was a point sort of making earlier about, once we've committed to borrowing for capital purposes, we're effectively locked into the impact of that. We can do things such as review our MRP policy, but effectively that's just, either kicking the can down the road or just rejigging. Ultimately that we've still got the same level of debt to pay. So it would ultimately become part of the wider budgetary considerations, but we are slightly restricted on the capital financing budget simply because we are committed and we're locked in because of those historic decisions that have been taken. So hopefully that helps to answer the question.
Yeah, thank you very much, Robert. Yeah, that's I'm clearer about that now. Cheers, thanks.
Councillor Williams, you've got a question.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, and it was actually quite related to that. I noticed you mentioned at 454 that you may be looking to review the MRP. I suppose it was really for this committee. Sometimes it's perhaps helpful, not saying that you do this all the time, but maybe as part of that review, it may be useful so that we understand a little bit about where we've come from. Obviously, we're looking how we go forward, quite right, but obviously the life of a committee is in the life of a particular term, and I could see there might be some value so that we understand better a little bit where we've come from. It's merely a suggestion, if you're looking to review the MRP in a specific way, and perhaps as a one-off short report or something like that, certainly you want to create more work. I'm simply suggesting it might give us some context that could be helpful to understand going forward. Thank you, Chair.
Yeah, I think on that note, the MRP policy is something that we will, it's right that it's subject to review, every so often. There are different ways of calculating and charging MRP. It is something we are intending to take a look at in the forthcoming financial year. So in a year's time, in effect, we would, if we were to change it, we may decide that what we've got now is appropriate. But if we were to change it, that would form part of this report in a year's time. But we could, we could potentially bring something specific, a short item on that to kind of gauge the views of the committee, before we lead into the capital strategy, or we could do it as part of this report in a year's time. But yeah, happy to consider that.
Thank you very much. Thank you everyone for your questions and queries. If there are no more, can we move on then to accepting the reports that we've just received? I assume if I see no hands, we'll accept them as agreed. I see no hands raised. So everyone's happy, we'll accept these as agreed. Thank you very much for your input. Right, moving on now to agenda item 8, which is the internal audit, progress against operational plan 2024-25. Mr. Peter Williams, can you please present your report?
Thank you, Chair. This is part of the quarterly update on progress against our annual plan, which you approve every March. It's a positive story in terms of the key messages. In terms of achievement of the plan, we've currently achieved 57% of the plan against a target of 75%. And obviously within that plan, we do what we call the core main financial systems. There's about 12 audits in there, and we've done 75% of those against a target of 100. So subject to no decrease in resources, and confident that we'll meet those targets, and even based on the work we've done to date, I think I'm in a position of being able to give an annual opinion as part of my annual report in June. So it's quite a positive message. There's nothing significant I want to bring to your attention in the other key messages. The appendix to the report, as per usual, shows which audits we've done in the last quarter on pages 87 to 88. There was only one report, I think, that had a limited opinion. That was around, I mentioned that in paragraph 4.2 on page 82. We did an audit of the electric charging points, and we came across some issues regarding some of the recharging and contactless payments and contract management. They've accepted those recommendations, and we'll do a follow-up in due course, and I'll report back to the audit committee on how that's going. But other than that, the follow-up opinions are quite positive. They're all moving up from either moderate to substantial or substantial to full, and nothing else to report, and it's a positive report. Thank you very much, and answer any questions.
Thank you very much. Has anybody got any questions or queries with regards to this report, please? No. I see no hands raised. Thank you very much. So if everybody's happy, please can you state who are against the recommendations or wish to abstain? Otherwise, I'll take them as agreed. I see nobody abstaining, so we'll take them as agreed. Thank you, everybody. Thank you, Ms. Williams. Moving on to agenda item 9, public sector internal audits, update global internal audit standards update. Mr. Williams, back to you again. Please can you present this report?
Thank you, Chair. There's been a few reports on this recently. Apologies, it is quite a dry topic, and to be dry within the audits we get is quite dry, let me show you. So I give my apologies in advance. The reason for the report has been an update. Since 2013, we've had a set of standards called the Public Sector Internal Audit Standards, PSIAS. I have to self-assess myself or the section against those standards annually, and every 5 years we have to have an external accreditation by an accredited body. We've had 2 of those, and the most recent one, which I think we reported to in January 24, was carried out by an organisation called SWAP, the South West Partnership. There are 3 possible outcomes: generally conforms, partially conforms, or fails to conform. Thankfully, we were in the generally conforms, and we have been for the 2 external accreditations we've had. So every 5 years. So our next one is now due in 2028. What's happened now is they've revised the standards. The public sector internal audit standards are now called the Global Internal Audit Standards, GIAS. They're obviously like an acronym. There's not major differences. I've been on the last 2 days. I've attended half-day courses run by CIPFA, which is my institute, giving the differences and what the new standards are looking to achieve. And I don't think they're significantly different from the current ones, and the fact that we're in a good position of generally conforms, I haven't got any grave concerns. One person on the course yesterday gave what I thought was a very good description of the new standards. They said, it's like having a jigsaw that's built, and now somebody's thrown that jigsaw in the air, and it's landed all over the place, and they just got the same questions in different domains. So it's gone from like 300 different questions to now 5 different domains, but they cover the same topics. The main changes appear to be there's emphasis on having an audit strategy. I haven't got a document that says audit strategy on the front, but the components of the strategy we deliver in terms of resourcing, audit planning, risk assessing, fraud testing, etc. So, you know, putting all those strands together into a strategy would be, I think, relatively an easy job. One of the other changes is that they're seeking clarification on the roles of people, like the role of audit committee, the role of senior management, the role of internal audit. And I think that's about getting buy-in, because I think some internal audit sections in the public sector and the private sector suffer from not being that well respected within the organisation, and they don't carry enough clout as they should do. So it's effectively getting buy-in. I don't suffer any of that in this council. We're well supported from the board, audit committee perspective, and from senior management. But obviously that's not necessarily the case across the board, and they're looking to get that signed up and clarification of roles and responsibilities. So again, I think that should be relatively painless to achieve. We've had, like I said, been on the training course for the last 2.5 days. I've got the material. There's also a briefing paper for audit committee members, which is due out. What I suggest is assess all that information, put it together, and set up a separate session for audit committee members outside the committee arena, and you have an hour or two to go through the standards, go through the responsibilities, and you can ask me any questions you want to know. Hopefully, I'll be in a position to answer them, having gone through and digested it. So, the key message is there's new standards out there. Within a year, I'll assess myself against those standards, but the external assessment still doesn't have to occur until 2028. The timescale still imposed on the 5-year timescale, which I clarified with SIPRA yesterday. So it's just like I said, it's an update. There's new standards. I'll assess them. I'll set a session for us all outside the committee structure, so we can go through it and ask any questions, and so we become familiar with those standards. But from speaking to other people in breakout groups yesterday as well, some people are more advanced than us because they're going to have the assessment next year, whereas I was in 2028. They haven't seen major differences. There's greater emphasis on some of the evidence. You need to prove where you are, but it didn't seem as a major change. So that's where we are. That's where we are with the standards. But please to answer any questions on any of those. I'll get back to you if I haven't got the answer.
Thank you for that. I think it's like a lot of public bodies. They let you settle and then they throw everything in the air and ask you to sort it all out again, don't they? Just to keep us on our toes. Right, has anybody got any questions or queries with regards to these reports, please? Councillor Williams.
No, I think Peter's helpfully answered that, because I was going to say I would have thought a useful recommendation would be some kind of report to the committee about things we perhaps need to be aware of. And you proposed that, so I would second that and see that that's actually beneficial at the appropriate time to come to the committee, whether that's a focused session, a part of a meeting, however seems best, but just some kind of report to say what we need to be aware of. End of.
Yeah, I think that would go for most of us. It would be good to have an update. Perhaps you could do it at the end of a meeting, close on the public part of it, and just have a one-to-one meeting with just a section. Mr. Rees, your hand is raised.
Thank you, Chair, and thanks again, Peter, for this. And yes, I fully endorse what you and Stuart have just said about, once you've gone through this briefing process and the system is settling in, that we then have a briefing as a committee. Forgive me if I've missed it in reading through the report, but could you confirm this is a new set of guidelines that covers all public authorities across all of our 4 nations, or is it just for Wales?
No, it's across the 4 nations. In fact, it's worldwide now, because they are now called the Global Internal Audit Standards, and they replace the public sector ones, which I think were more UK-based, but the Institute of Internal Auditors have got global standards now. But for us, they've been in place since 2013, so it's just a revision of those 2013 into a new 2025 version. But it applies across the board. It's not a Welsh thing. Yeah.
Thank you. You happy with that, Mr. Rees? Okay, lovely. Councillor Asher, your hand is raised.
I don't really want to have the last word on this, but I take away from Peter that he's got a new set of standards from the people that measure his metrics, as it were. And I always come away from these meetings very clear what Peter's internal audit section does. It's taken me the years I've been on this committee to understand this, which I think is good. I look forward to the training and listen to this, because when I started, internal audit was not clear, but I get the idea that he keeps an eye on what's happening internally, and obviously externals, what happens. It's not my strongest suit, to be honest, but now, the number of years I've been on this committee, I get it. And I think it's very valuable what we get, and it's very valuable the way Peter explains it. And the bit about throw the jigsaw up in the air and then having to rearrange it so we understand it's done. I get that one. It's a very good analogy. Thank you, Peter.
Thank you. You probably didn't know that. He's going to bring the jigsaw to training, so we can look forward to that one. Mr. Callagher, you've got your hands raised.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Just to continue with the jigsaw analogy, at least all the straight edges are still there. What I think I just want to endorse what everybody's confirming in a way, that the extra session to help us understand the new internal audit metrics would be entirely valuable. I'm thinking in the longer term, if some thought could be given over the coming months as to what could be put together to support new members of the committee in the medium to longer term. I'm talking as a lay person who's not versed in the lexicon of local authority, particularly in the acronyms and the roles of the various committees. So if we could just consider what sort of an end product we might want to achieve in this exercise, to see how it can actually get not just lay members but new members of this committee more up to speed in understanding the role that we play and the interfaces with all the other committees.
Okay, thank you for those thoughts. Okay, that's lovely, thank you. Will be noted. Right, if there are no more questions or queries with regard to this report, can I assume that everybody will take them as agreed? Yeah. Okay. They're all agreed. Moving on to agenda item 10, National Fraud Initiative Updates and Self-Assessment Checklist. Again, over to Mr. Peter Williams.
Thank you, Chair. This follows on a bit from item 6, where they looked at where Audit Wales looked at our counter fraud arrangements. One of the recommendations in there was about bringing more information on NFI. Yeah, I do bring bits of it in my annual report, but I've agreed I'll bring more data in to future meetings. In terms of the National Fraud Initiative, it's something that's been going and run previously by the Audit Commission and now run by Audit Wales since the early 90s, I think, or the mid-90s at least. If I'm being perfectly honest, we fully take part in the exercise. It's a mandatory exercise. We submit the data within the deadlines, and we have now in the recent one, which is it's a 2-year process. We submitted that data and we received the matches in December. We don't get a great deal out of it in terms of identification of frauds and errors. That's not because of the quality of the data. I think that's probably supplements their conclusion on our counter fraud arrangements. I think our counter fraud arrangements are pretty effective. I'd never say there's no fraud in the authority. There's a lot of it is undetected up until a certain point in time. But I think the fact that we get low numbers of matches or low numbers of frauds and errors identified as the NFI further supports the view that our counter-fraud arrangements in place are quite positive. So I think it reinforces that point. On the specifics of the NFI then, in terms of bringing information to your attention, I've added a couple of appendices. There's apologies for the wait. I meant to cut the one down but forgot. It gives a bit of a time frame in terms of what we operate at the moment. And the one detailed one gives about the level of detail we submit the data, which you don't actually need, and that's my apology. I should have deleted that off, but feel free to read it at your leisure, to be honest with you. Like I said, in terms of the current exercise, we've submitted the data. The data has now been matched. It's matched across all UK authorities, public authorities. So it'll be us, it'll be central government, etc., HMRC data. And the big areas that come out of it are usually sort of housing benefit or single person discount, council tax. I didn't want to overload the agenda, but I have got another report, which was the NFI National Report for 21-22. I'll forward that to the Audit Committee members after the meeting for information as well. And there's some decent case studies in there in terms of things they looked at. There's things on blue badge schemes, there's things on council tax, single person discount, housing benefit matches. It basically matches lots of data, and very often we assess the matches, and they're not frauds and they're not errors. Most of them are errors, or it's the quality of the data. But we go through it, we coordinate with the departments. The departments have a lot more information about those systems, and they're the best place to do it. But my group order and my corporate oversees it to make sure we meet the deadlines. So, and that process has been in for quite a while, to be honest, and it appears to work. Like I said, we're working through the data. I would have thought at the end of that there'll be an output, and I'll bring a report back to that committee to say this is what I meant for Torvine in terms of these are the matches, these are the investigations that arose of it, and this is the sort of level of fraud and error identified. And I would have thought that's probably going to be about a year's time all the data matching is sorted, and we do any investigations. So I'll bring it back to a future audit committee in terms of that NFI, but I'll send some other information outside of the committee just for awareness for councillors, and I'd be quite happy to attach it onto the briefing I mentioned in the last item of PSIS, or if there's anything on NFI, we can discuss, and we can do a bit of a combined training session on the two, to be honest with you, so it'll increase awareness of members' responsibilities and a bit more about the NFI. I'm quite happy to put the two together on that.
Yes, I think that will be quite valuable. Thank you very much. Any questions with regard to this report? Councillor Williams?
So, if I've understood you right, Peter, essentially this is a sort of data collection process that all the local authorities would have to do. There's a kind of oversight arrangement to sort of look at any mismatches and problems, and then internal audit have the opportunity to have oversight and look through that as well. Have I summed it up fairly accurate? Great. And so I guess for our perspective, it would be helpful to know any findings, if you like, within the year in terms of mismatches that have led to the detection of irregularities or fraud. Thank you.
In terms of the last exercise, which was 21-22, I think the level of we didn't identify any frauds. It was mainly errors, and it was quite low in number. It was around about the £24,000 mark. And they were most of those were to do with council tax reduction schemes. So, for example, in terms of the matches themselves, I think we have probably 50 or 60 different data sets where they'll match housing benefit to blue badges to permit numbers, council tax to pensions, council tax to payroll to payroll across public sector bodies. So it's quite and very often people have two jobs, you know what I mean? So they're on our payroll, they're on, say, Monmouth's payroll, and that's not a fraud, that's not an error, it's legitimate. They've got two jobs, they work across two councils. So a lot of them can be sort of resolved in that situation. But yeah, that probably sums up where we're going, to be honest. And like I said, the output, it was around about 25,000, I think, was errors, and the current exercise, we probably be able to report that in about a year's time.
I think that would be appreciated, Chair, to report back. And all I can say as well is I'm grateful that I perhaps wasn't in the review body to go through the data sets in detail like that, which not a task I would envy anyone.
Thank you very much. Yes, Sydney.
Chair, if I can just come in. The other part of the National Fraud Initiative is that we provide our data, which goes into the national scheme, which enables others to see if there's matches. So if a fraudster is carrying out some fraud, they may be claiming housing benefit in, say, somewhere in England, we wouldn't know about it. But our data show that they were getting a single person discount. So it's a two-way process. So it's an important part of the process. We put our data into the system.
Thank you for that. Mr.
Sorry, to be honest, a lot of the matches come out with a grim subject, but it's around people passing away, you know what I mean? Where, you know, pensions are not knocked off or blue badges are not extinguished, etc. So, you know, the check is about living people more than anything.
Thank you. Mr. Rees, your query?
Yeah, thanks, Chair, and thanks again, Peter. And no need to apologise for giving us all of this detail, because from time to time it's important that we get our heads around this. I think I'm clear about how we within the authority can identify if any fraud has arisen. But I think I'd like to understand a little bit more about how, when this information is given to Audit Wales or whoever, how they are then able to analyse it and highlight if they can find out if there's any fraud been going on that we may have missed. I think that's where I'm coming from with it, because if you're bringing all this information together, there's got to be a sound reason for it. Otherwise, it's a bit of a waste of time. Thanks.
In terms of the collation of the data, we have to populate an application called the NFI app, where when we look at the matches and we identify something, we put a figure on a potential fraud or potential error that we've identified. That gets grossed up across all the bodies in Wales, and that then forms part of their national report. These are sort of targeted things where they could be indicating fraud. In terms of fraud outside this, I don't think they probably advise us on that, to be honest. We probably know the authority better than they do in a nice sort of way. And as part of the audit plan, we target the areas which we think are susceptible to the higher risks of fraud. They might assist us in part of that. And you know, the review they just did, they do quote a figure around national fraud, quoting like 1 to 5% of people's gross spend. And that's underpinned by a review in specific exercises carried out by the Cabinet Office. I have asked them for a copy of those Cabinet Office reports, just to see if there's anything in there that we can build into our deterrent practices as well. And I'm waiting for that to come to me, to be honest with you. So, you know, they're always there for advice, but in terms of specific areas, they've identified these are probably the high-risk areas to look at, and the matches are set up accordingly. A lot of them do, unfortunately, revolve around the benefit forums in terms of council tax benefits and housing tax benefit, housing benefits, because they are the areas within our remit that are susceptible to the highest area of fraud, unfortunately.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, sorry, Peter, you just mentioned then about that percentage figure that's been published about the from Cabinet Office source, and I agree with you about. I think there needs to be a bit more information put out about that, because that was a bit misleading in that it sort of implied that just because they've found it there, that other public bodies are it could be affecting other public bodies in the same way, when in fact it isn't. So be interesting when you do get, if you do get an answer to that. Thanks.
Thank you for that. Right, if there are no other questions or queries with regard to this report, the recommendations are on page 93, and it's the action to be taken following this decision is that the self-assessment be carried out by the head of internal audit, as in 7.1. If I see no hands raised, I'll take it as agreed. Right, everybody's happy, so we'll take this report as agreed. Thank you, Peter. Right, moving on to agenda item 11, which is our audit committee work programme. It's here for our information. It keeps us on track. Peter, have you got any comments with regards to this?
No, it's just an update following each meeting, and that's the kind of state today in terms of what's on the next agenda and what we've seen today.
Thank you. Has anybody got any questions on with regards to this? No. Right, before we move on to the last agenda item, there's a person sat around the table, Nigel. He's been very quiet in the corner. I understand this is your last meeting with us. So on behalf of the committee, I'd like to thank you for your work and support over the years that I've been on this committee, and wish you all the best for your retirement in the future.
Thank you very much, Chair. We seem to have said a lot of goodbyes over the last 2 weeks, and certainly yesterday. But I've been on the audit committee almost from when it started to where it is now, and I think it's a good governance and audit committee. It does what it's supposed to do, and it does say it on the tin. And you're an excellent chair of the committee. And Peter and I have been there through all the various iterations. So thank you all as a committee as well, and hopefully you continue to do good work. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and thank you for your kind words, and obviously the foundation stones that were laid by people who set this off before I even joined it. I've just built on top of it. I can't take any credit. Thank you very much. Wishing you all the best. Last agenda item is the date of the next meeting, which will be the 27th of March this year, 2025. Thank you all very much for attending, and wishing you all the best ongoing until then. Thank you. Bye.